God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise, in God alone I trust, I will not be afraid. What can mortal man do to me?
And good afternoon, evening, everyone, and welcome back to Preterist Apologetics. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and right over there on the East Coast. I'm in the middle of the United States in Oklahoma. Mike is in North Carolina. That is right. Why do I keep forgetting?
I moved from Sylva, North Carolina to Knoxville, Tennessee. Not far.
I'm sorry. Yes, indeed. I knew that. I don't know why I forgot that.
Oh, and I have an announcement. We will be starting or planning a church, Rick Welch and myself and some families. And it's going to be kind of it's going to be a local fellowship, but it's going to be like Berean Bible Church. It's going to have a internet focus as well. And we will probably have services kind of an odd time, like around 3 o'clock in the afternoon for those people that, you know, don't have a nighttime service or something like that and want to get some.
Are you sure 3 o'clock on Sundays is scriptural?
Right. Yeah, right.
Listen, before we get into our program tonight, Mike, you've got a really exciting announcement about your book, the redo of your book. So go ahead.
Yes. The old cover, this is the only one I have left of the old cover, and it's got a rip on, it's got a tear on it. That's why I can't. Okay. And it had Trump on it. And because it had Trump on it, I had people whining and fussing, and I'm not going to get it because it's got Trump on it. He's such a divide. And I'm like, whatever, man. Okay. Yeah. So I went ahead and Bob Cruikshank, myself, and Jeff kind of came together and did a new cover for it. And I've got a new appendix, or a new preface rather. And the old preface is now the prologue. And we've got some more description of what I believe is really taking place. And that is the New World Order, some of these big banks, the Rothschilds, who have started wars in the past. They've had the ace up the sleeve for World War III being between Israel and the Muslim world. They've had that for a long time. They've talked about it. Albert Pike's letter predicts that's what their plan is. And since we're coming up on Agenda 2030, and they want to roll out their CBDC, their currency, their digital currency, one world currency, they need a major, not just a COVID thing, but they need another world war to bankrupt the country so that they can usher that in. And so I've been doing a lot of study, not only on my preterism, but some of the political side, and looking at this and kind of seeing how the two are coming together and trying to do the alarm bells as much as we can. And it's frustrating because, you know, you have, you know, I was excited. I got 100 orders out. Okay. But really, I need about 100 million people.
Oh, I understand that.
Seeing the dangers of not only Talmudic Zionism, but evangelical Zionism, because Don, here's the frustrating thing. We have a very small remnant in our government that we can truly say are conservative, and that may love Christ and may pursue some kind of integrity. All right.
Yeah.
But that small group, Don, are owned by the ADL and AIPAC and the Zionists. So they are suckers for what is coming.
Oh, yeah.
They want it.
No question.
Yeah. And they're going to be really disappointed when the rapture doesn't take them off the earth.
Yes.
So,
well,
yeah.
Congratulations on the new book, and glad it's going so well for you. I've been telling people when I've had the opportunity that I don't know of another book like yours that is out there right now, and encouraging them to purchase your book. I think the research that you've done on Islamic eschatology is just incredible. I mean, I've been corresponding with some people over the last few days who have been interacting with some Muslims, and they've told me, they said Muslims feel like failed eschatology is the Achilles heel of Christianity.
Right.
Yeah, and they do, and many Jews do as well.
Yes.
And unfortunately, seemingly the huge majority of Christians are totally unaware of of even the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, what? I don't see the problem. But
And
anyway,
then the other frustrating thing is I have a movie script that has been done for a year and a half, as you know, because I sent you some of it, because I wanted the debate scene between the preterist and the Muslim.
right.
I wanted to get your impact as well. And that has been done for a year and a half. Now, why did I do a movie script just for that? Because I knew what was coming, the war, and it's kind of started, it's percolating. I don't think it's in full-fledged yet. But what is going to draw us into this war, Don? It's going to be them activating a Muslim terrorist cell here in the United States to draw us in emotionally to get more involved into this war. And that's the premise of the movie. And I've got two actors that are excited about it. And then I've got to figure out where I'm going to get the money and a producer and all that stuff.
I got $1.95. I'll send you.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I knew, obviously, as you say, of your movie script and the need for people to understand how serious this is. And, you mentioned the terror cells. I have been telling people ever since 9/11, that's what really kind of woke me up. But I've been telling people since 9/11 because I'm aware of the fact, because this has been reported on Arkansas News, that there are Islamic training camps in the backwoods, scattered throughout the backwoods of Arkansas.
Absolutely.
They're in Minnesota, they're in Ohio, they're scattered throughout America. And even the government has acknowledged that there are these sleeper cells all scattered all throughout America. And I've told Jan, I'm pretty sure that they're coordinating with one another, and how much our government is, how do I express this, paying attention.
They're not. They're going after January 6th people.
Oh yeah, well, that's obvious.
They're locking up grandmas and grandpas
Yeah.
for walking through the ropes, for the police escorting them through a tour of the Capitol. Most of them, when they got there, they didn't really know what was going on.
Exactly.
So that's what their focus is on. And here's the problem: is that everyone knows that Biden is a puppet, but they don't know who he's a puppet for. And to me, it's real clear he's a puppet for Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and the UN, because we're finding out that the UN and the World Economic Forum, they're the ones, and George Soros, our good old friend George Soros, is funding the current invasion that we're experiencing in our country right now. And all of those people, some of them are China military, others are Islamic military, and they're just waiting for orders. Yeah. And, Biden's not doing anything because he's a part of destroying America to usher in the whole global nightmare.
Nothing better illustrates that, in my estimation, Mike, than the fact that Texas Governor Abbott has been taking really drastic actions to prevent illegal immigration into Texas. So what does Biden Justice Department do? Oh, they sue Abbott.
Yeah. They sue, not only they sue Abbott, remember all that material that Trump didn't quite get the border finished, all the metal and stuff.
Yep.
They let it rust. Then after that, they took it and they melted it down so that it couldn't be built. They are actively destroying they're facilitating it. They're paying for it. The Biden regime, this is completely unconstitutional and illegal. But this is where we are, unfortunately.
Well, and when you've got Mayorkas sitting there in front of the subcommittees going, well, we've got a problem, but we're really, really working hard to fix it. Well, Yeah, of course you are.
Uh,
You're actually arresting ICE agents who are arresting illegal aliens, illegal immigrants into America. Uh, if they capture known criminals, they release them. They take them just across the border, release them, let them right straight back in. And we're seeing an increasing number of Americans who are the victims of violent crimes, of people who came in illegally, who had been deported time after time. They're back here and they're committing violent crimes. And what is the Biden administration doing about it? Opening the borders, melting down the wall material,
yeah.
exactly like you said. It's truly frightening. And I just do not see where Biden believes in anything that America stands for. And
No.
and his entire administration. I believe that they are Marxist at the very best.
Yeah.
They're communist at the very worst. And I don't know that you can say worst or better or worse when it comes to Marxism or communism. But the point of fact is, everything that they have been doing is in fact destructive to the America that you and I'm older than you, but the
Yeah.
America that you and I grew up knowing and loving and seeing and appreciating is everything that they have set out to destroy. And there's no question about it whatsoever.
Yeah. And even the conservative media, semi-conservative like Fox News, there's only a few of them that will mention the New World Order and show the connect. Most of them are dealing with symptoms. They're trying to portray Biden as just giving really bad policies that are destroying America. Like, how can he be so stupid? How can whoever's running the country, how can they be so stupid to do these policies that don't work, that are just harmful? No, they know exactly
what they're doing.
They're destroying us from within. That's what they're doing.
Well, they've set out to destroy the very moral fabric of America, the nuclear family. You remove any references to God and morality from the public schools. And I've been saying literally for 50 years, because I saw it even in the conservative state of Arkansas. You began to see certain things. I've been saying the National Education Association is one of the greatest threats that America is facing. It has been run by communists for ever since I can remember. If they are not overt public communists, their policies are communist. So what has happened is all of our institutions of, quote, higher education have devolved into cesspools.
Yes.
They are cesspools of immorality. They promote and they advocate the destruction of the nuclear family, of Christian morals. And if you want to use the term Judeo-Christian morals, they detest everything about it. They have at the very top of their faculties people just like at Harvard, just like at Yale, who hate America. They are truly anti-Semitic, and neither you or I support the Zionist state of Israel. But to promote violence is a totally different beast.
Yeah.
And when you've got these Palestinians marching on the campuses, shouting death to Jews, and the university presidents going, well, that we don't really appreciate that. That's against our public stand. But would they kick them out? Nah. No, that's so the president, was it Harvard or Yale? The president of Harvard or Yale had to resign.
Yeah.
And now they're putting pressure on some of the presidents of the other institutions, because they've got the same identical problem. They've got the same ideology that has been promoted through the NEA all the way up into the institutions like all of the Ivy League schools and others as well.
And as you know, the whole Marxist mentality is divide and conquer. So they're constantly, race wars, blacks against whites. The police departments are supposedly have systemic racism in them, and white people have to apologize. All this is Marxism. All this is fascism, and these young kids don't know it. They fall for it hook, line, and sinker. And COVID was another, and they talk about social engineering in their documents. And these are war documents, people. You have to read their stuff, trust me. And they talk about social engineering. So COVID was a test. Unfortunately, there was, I believe, a part of that was depopulation, but but the other part of it was to see how much of a population our population would be willing to give up our freedoms for an emergency, which Kissinger talked about. And segue, Sam Frost tried to review my book, gave praise to Jimmy Carter and Kissinger. That to me shows that this guy is so far out in la land when it comes to going into liberalism and interpreting the Bible like Daniel. And now his whole political, he doesn't know what's going on. But anyway, it tests our country to see who would take the shot, who would put the mask on and set aside their freedoms. And now the test is with this war kind of in the beginning stages. Okay, how many people are going to be pro-Israel?
Yep.
How can we divide them now between the whole Palestinian and Israel thing? And it just creates this chaos in our country. And that's what Marxism and fascism and communism thrives on, is division and chaos. And then they come in with the military and say, well, we're going to solve it for you.
Yep. That's exactly what happened in Tsarist Russia with the revolution in Russia. That's what happened in China. You divide the people. You get the people fighting against one another, whether it's economic classes, whether it's social classes, doesn't matter what it is. You get them fighting against one another. The other side, they're inhuman. They're not right. They're hateful. They're ugly. They're against our state. And then, like you said, the military comes in, takes over. And I've said this, and we got to get into our program tonight. You and I are kind of on our soapbox here. But it absolutely amazes me how Hollywood, which is nothing but a cesspool, absolute moral cesspool, they wouldn't even come out and condone even and praise the movie The Sound of Freedom, which is against pedophilia.
Right.
Well, there's nothing but a bunch of religious zealots is what they are. Why don't you condemn pedophilia?
Yeah, it's just simple.
Yeah, it's just real simple. But I've been saying this. So Hollywood will bend over backwards, and you're seeing it increasingly in sitcoms and movies and what have you. The Muslim individual, they're the kind, the loving, the compassionate, the smart. The Christian is the radical, whacked out weirdo. Okay. And Jan and I were talking about this just recently, and I said, the thing about it is that these people who are defending the Muslim religion, and look, I know some Muslim people who are very kind. They hate that, at least publicly and in private conversations, they deplore the radical element of it. I don't know what would happen if the radicals threatened them, but nonetheless,
what you ask them, this is how to draw it out of them. This is what you do, Don. You ask them, well, do you believe that Sharia law should be implemented wherever you live?
I actually did ask one of them on that occasion, and this one individual, super nice guy, and he said, absolutely not.
Well, then he's not a Muslim.
I know. He's not a faithful Muslim according to their standard. But I asked him that very question. Do you think we ought to have Sharia law in America? And he was, absolutely not. He said, no. And I was like, well, okay, then. So anyway, I made the observation. I said, what you're seeing is with all this political defense of Islamism, the industry, entertainment industry, I said, what these people who are doing this fail to understand that if the Muslims took over in states like Minnesota, there are areas in which police will not go in certain towns in Minnesota because they've enforced Sharia law.
And that's pretty much England now.
It is. Absolutely.
These poor people can't walk down the streets of where they were born and they grew up because a complete town and city they're all Islamic, and you
Yes.
walk down that, and they throw bottles at you, and
Yeah.
they'll totally kill you.
That's right. So anyway, I told her, I said, the entertainment industry, these politicians who are supporting all of this don't understand that if the Muslims took over, they would be the first ones to die.
Yeah, I know.
they wouldn't tolerate all this garbage that Hollywood is producing, not by a long shot. And they would not allow anything close to freedom of speech. And the Bill of Rights would just go away.
Yeah. And Klaus Schwab, and this will be maybe the last thing that we got to jump into this present indicative. Klaus Schwab talks about depopulation. They want to depopulate the earth by like 90%. They want us to eat bugs.
Yep.
Okay. And this is a real thing, people. I know it sounds crazy, just like Hitler when he first started out sounded crazy. Like, oh, no one's going to believe this stuff. Oh no, they are. The whole climate cult has a huge following, and these people don't realize that they think that if they promote it, that they're somehow going to be safe. These, with communism, it's not long before they're kicking down your door, even though you were there supporting it and tattling on all those conservative Christians. No, they'll be coming for you too. That's how it works. Well,
it certainly happened at the beginning in German society. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I don't know how many of our audience is familiar with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a Christian minister in Germany, and he resisted, and he was arrested. But he said something to the effect, when the Nazis began to come to power, they went after this group and I said nothing. They went after that group and I said nothing. They went after this group and I said nothing. Finally, they came for me.
Exactly.
And that's exactly the progression. Yeah. And people do not understand the danger when you allow the government to start persecuting Christians, as is happening more and more and more. Or you got to look at New York City. They're trying to pass a law to force Chick-fil-A to be open on Sunday. That is blatant, overt religious persecution.
Yeah.
Because the reason Chick-fil-A is not open on Sunday is because of their religious beliefs. I don't care if you believe in their particular brand of religious belief or not. Doesn't matter. They claim to be Christians who do not believe in working on Sunday. Okay, that's fine. But New York City trying to pass a law to penalize them, I'm talking major fines for not being open on Sunday, to go against their religious convictions. Blatant religious persecution. Yeah. That's under the Biden administration. You think they won't do other things as well? You say, oh, that's in New York. They're a bunch of wackos. Yeah. And we got wackos all across America.
And you know what's killing me is Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street. Now BlackRock alone owns trillions and trillions of dollars of our retirement funds. Okay. Now you wonder why all of these companies are going woke. Like, why would Target have a whole transgender thing and promote all of this garbage? Why would they do that? Because these companies, Don, they're called ESG scores.
Yes.
They can't get loans.
That's right.
Because these big banks are globalists, Rothschilds, all of it. And they're trying to destroy us from within culturally, like you said, break down the family. They're making all of these companies do things that they don't want to, but they have to survive. And the thing that's killing me is that they're using our own money, our 401ks, BlackRock is an investment company, to completely destroy us. And we're going to have to do some amendments to our Constitution, because they've done a work around our Constitution through the corporations.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to figure out a way to sew up that loophole, because that is effectively destroying us.
And the trouble of it is, the senators, the congressmen that are currently in power, so to speak, are so wrapped up in the entire financial world, they don't want to make any waves. They don't want to change the rules. They don't want to change the laws. They certainly don't want to close up these loopholes that these humongous corporations are benefiting from and persecuting the rest of America. Okay. Okay, folks, that's the that's your political commentary here on Preterist. And I'm pretty sure, Mike, we'll get some comments. You guys need to stay away from politics and just talk Bible. Well, guess what? We can. It's our show. We can talk about what we want to.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is important stuff. So what we want to talk about, and we'll undoubtedly have to get into it more next week because Mike just talked on and on and on about this political stuff, you know. So, but what we want to get into tonight is an area on 1 Corinthians 15 and the resurrection that has caused commentators, continues to cause commentators absolute fits. We have a commentary. Let me just reach over very quickly. I should have gotten this before. This is the New International Greek Testament Commentary. It is by Anthony Thistleton. He is a recognized Greek scholar, world recognized Greek scholar. When he comes to 1 Corinthians 15, he takes note of the present passive indicatives that are used in 1 Corinthians 15 when Paul is talking about the resurrection. In other words, to put this as simply as we can, we'll look at some passages here in a moment. Paul says, with what body are they, that's the dead ones, being present passive indicative, being raised? Now, are you going to find translations that honor the present passives? Generally speaking, not. Why is that? This is a classic case of translator bias, because 99.9.9% of translators believe that Paul is predicting a future to us resurrection of dead human bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So even though Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 uses either the present passive indicative or the present active indicative to talk about the resurrection, they basically say, well, yeah, I know. And Thistleton says it's difficult to deal with these present passive indicatives.
And I'm trying to find Gordon Fee's commentary.
Oh, yes. I've got Gordon Fee right over there. Yeah.
It's somewhere. But yeah, he says it's puzzling.
Yes.
He puzzles over it.
And they're not the only ones.
Right.
Other scholars down through the years, as they've gone through the text, they're like, why does Paul use all of these present passive indicatives? Now, I've got tell a little anecdote right here. Some years ago, I was in an email correspondence. Someone had put me in touch with this guy or put him in touch with me. I don't remember which it is, but he was a Reformed guy out of St. Louis, somewhere up in there like that. And I got this email one day that was just blasting me to all kinds of perdition. I mean, I'm hopeless. I'm lost. I'm gone and done, because 1 Corinthians 15 obviously is dealing with the raising of physical bodies out of the dirt. Now, by the way, folks, on March the 2nd, I'm pretty sure that's the date, I'm going to be having a formal debate, YouTube debate with Chris Date. Now, Chris Date's already had a couple of debates. He's had a debate with Michael Miano and with Stacey Tuberville.
Oh.
And it's been on the resurrection. I haven't watched the debate with Stacey Tuberville. I have watched some of the debate with Michael Miano, and Mike and I have been corresponding back and forth over that debate. Mike's been very helpful for me on giving me some insights. But nonetheless, numerous people had asked if I would debate Chris Date. And I didn't know the guy, just like he didn't know me. And when I very first watched the debate that he had with Michael Miano, I was going, man, there are all sorts of debate tricks being played here. And Mike let him get away, unfortunately, with most of them.
Right.
And I just thought to myself, he should never be allowed to get away with all this. You know, if I were doing this, I would definitely say, well, okay, let's address this, because here's your basic fundamental assumption. It's false. Here's your second false assumption. Guess what? It's false. And so I would go from the foundation up instead of dealing with a lot of peripherals. And Mike, in a lot of ways, really said some good stuff. I do have to say that. Mike presented some very good thoughts. So anyway, that will be on March the 2nd. It will be carried on Standing for the Truth Ministries by Donnie, what's his name? Dubinsky or something like that?
Yeah, I forget.
Yeah, anyway. But the closer it comes to time, I will be making announcements. I'm sure Chris will be as well. But I'm really, really looking forward to that exchange with Chris Dade. I mean, he's a guy, he's legitimate academic. He's an adjunct professor. He's, has taught Hebrew. He's taught Greek. So, like I said, he's an academic, so to speak. And so it promises to be a very good, entertaining, at least, debate. And I'm very much looking forward to that. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned a presupposition, a faulty presupposition that the translators have when they approach 1 Corinthians 15 on the present passive indicative, because there's no reason why you wouldn't really translate it being raised and so forth. But notice in an article that was originally written, I think, by David Chilton, and then Gary DeMar kind of jumped in there as well, and it's published on American Vision. They both point this out in 2 Peter 3:11. Let me read it to you. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. Now, I'm reading from the Lexham English Bible, which was the only translation I found that brings it out. Just like I had to go find Wheat's New Testament to deal with 1 Corinthians 15. But listen to what he says. Therefore, since all these things are being dissolved. Okay, now what does Chilton and DeMar say? They say this, quote, contrary to the misleading renderings of translators, blinded by their presuppositions, they talk about how this was already occurring, right? And I find that interesting because they're saying, hey, look, this fits in with what we see Paul saying. The world is passing away. He says this elsewhere, 1 John, 2:17 and 18. It's the last hour. The world is passing away. And they say, well, look, this isn't talking about the second rule of laws of thermodynamics. It's talking about the old covenant world was in a process of being dissolved, of going away, and the new covenant world was taking its place. So if something is in the process and we're looking outside and the trees aren't the elements that are in the process of being dissolved, what world was being dissolved? What elements were being dissolved during the time Peter was writing, and how, the stoicheia, how was it used elsewhere? So what I found here is interesting, because if this is an argument that the partial preterist wants to make in 2 Peter 3:11, we sure in the world can use that same argument in addressing the present tense in 1 Corinthians 15.
Absolutely. It's a great point. Pardon me. I've been trying to justify in my mind buying a whole bunch of the Lexham commentaries because I know that they're more of a critical apparatus type of thing. And
you've got the Logos Bible software like I do.
Yes.
Thousands of dollars of investment.
Yeah, it's just like, oh my goodness gracious. So, but I know it's an extremely helpful tool for understanding the Greek, for understanding the finer points of syntax and what have you. But here's the point, and the point that DeMar and Chilton were both making again, is that Peter was affirming that the elements were, when he wrote, in the process of passing away. You've had people, I've had people, well, it's just second law of thermodynamics. Well, DeMar and Chilton were right. No. That is not what they were going. Let's just look a little closer at 1 John chapter 2, 15 to 17. This world is passing away. Present active. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul said, the time is short. And Colossians chapter 2, and Paul's talking about, by the way, the elements. And he says, you have died to the elements of the world. Well, after all, if we're talking about earth, wind, fire, and water as the basic elements of the world, Paul's talking to people that were no longer subject to the physical elements of the world. Really? Don't think that's going to work. And so he talks about the elements passing away. There is a constant reference in the New Testament when one begins to pay attention, the world is passing away. Look at Romans 13:11. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. That is exactly what John was saying in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 8. The darkness is passing, the true light is already shining. Well, is he talking about a new sun? Well, in a way, but not in that physical sense by any means. But he is talking about the new creation. That's what he's focused on.
The morning star that was dawning.
Exactly. Exactly. And so when you examine the New Testament about this already but not yet, the already of the passing away, Hebrews chapter 8, verse 13, that which is made obsolete is in the process of passing away. There is a present passive that is at work.
And Don, how many times have we made parallels? In other words, if you want to understand 1 Corinthians 15, first rule of hermeneutics is you study the immediate context of the letter you're looking at. And then after you branch out from that letter, if that same author has done another letter, that's the first thing you go to in the New Testament.
It just makes sense.
Right. So we go to 2 Corinthians, 3 through, I guess you go to 7, and we find something interesting. Something else was in the process of taking place. They were being transformed into Christ's image. So there was a transformation that was taking place. Was it biological? No. Were they like walking and sometimes glowing and sometimes not? Was that the transformation into the likeness of Christ? No. But that transformation was a covenantal transformation. And Don and I are going to argue that is the premise behind Paul saying the body was being sown, the body was being raised. It's the same covenantal contrast. It's the same process that's taking place. Even in Corinthians, as you know, Don, Paul says that the saints were being saved. And he even says unbelievers were in the process of perishing. It's almost like we have a second Exodus where the unbelievers are perishing in exile in the dust and the dirt. And maybe Joshua and Caleb are being saved, ready to go into the inheritance of the promised land. But, we have to pay attention to these tenses because they mean a lot. In 1 Corinthians 15, do you know who the first person was? I think I was the first person to bring out a valid translation, but I don't know who was the first that discovered this present passive indicative.
I don't remember who it was that brought it to my attention very first. I know that Jim Hopkins, who's a Church of Christ ministry, is quite elderly now. I understand he's in bad health, but from Alabama, Daleville, Alabama, I was privileged to speak there a couple of different times. But years and years and years ago, I know that Jim was pointing this out. As a matter of fact, I have some paperwork right here from Jim with his comments on the present passives and present actives. But I know that Jim's not the very first one that noted it by any means. I'll be really honest. I don't remember if Max King ever focused
He
on
never
them.
did. I think Larry Siegel said he and someone else had been pointing it out, but I don't know if they got it from somebody else. I kind of found out later in the game, as usual. I'm like the last to kind of know anything. But then I started doing, well, there's got to be a translation, that's picked this up. And I looked everywhere. And then there it was, Wuest New Testament. I was like, have you guys seen this? And they're like, no, this is awesome. It's like, because Kenneth S. Wuest was no joke when it came to Greek.
No, he was a very well recognized Greek scholar. He really was. And so, by the way, I want to go back just, maybe this will help somebody to see. And you mentioned it ever so briefly, but let's just drive the point home. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul is undoubtedly, no one denies this, talking about covenantal transformation from the glory of the old covenant to the glory of the new. Well, what is that glory of the new? It's the image of Christ. That's what he's talking about. So he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 16, and so we, through the Spirit, are being transformed into the image of Christ and into that greater glory, which is the glory of Christ. Okay. So what is resurrection? Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says, as we have borne the image of the earthly. By the way, that's an aorist. That's a past tense. As we have borne. Now he's writing to Christians. And he says they have, past tense, borne the image of the earthly. Well, when did they give up the image of the earthly? If that image of the earthly is biological substance, it's me being a 5'8" guy. Right. When did they give that up? So then, and it's a passage of tremendous controversy, but the weight of evidence is by far on what I'll share here in a moment. But as we have borne the image of the earthly, most translations render it, we shall bear the image of the heavenly. That's not right.
Let us.
The proper is, it is in a subjunctive mode. And folks, there is more documentation than you can shake a stick at. Now, look, Vine's Expository Dictionary of the New Testament comes there to that passage and says, well, the subjunctive has the better weight, but it certainly cannot be translated that way because that would mean that we would have something to do with our resurrection. Oh, well, yeah, duh. That's kind of what that would mean. And other commentators have seen the problem. And I was reading one today. Well, you'd have to see my desk to realize the problem.
I'm looking at mine, so I understand.
Yeah, you understand. I was reading one today. It may be this one. Okay. The Holy Spirit's agency in the resurrection of the dead, an exegetical theological study of 1 Corinthians 15. This guy very subtly acknowledges the subjunctive, but wants to set it aside. Okay. He refuses to go into in depth whether or not the subjunctive is the best attested text. Now, I've got a very good friend named Paul Anderson. Paul Anderson works with the ancient manuscripts every day. He has worked with Daniel Wallace, who, produced the massive Beyond the Basics of Greek Grammar. He has worked with him. He's worked with some of the other great apologists of our day, working with the actual manuscripts. So I contacted him some good while back. And I asked him, is it the future or is it the subjunctive? And that's what it comes down to. Is Paul saying we shall bear the image or let us bear the image? Because one becomes a paranesis, an exhortation to bear the image of Christ. Well, how do we bear the image of Christ? Well, let's see. Ephesians chapter 4. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord that you no longer walk after the way of the Gentiles, after the darkness of their mind, because of the ignorance that is in them, but that you put off the old man, which is corrupt according to deceitful lust, and that you put on the new man, which is created in righteousness. Well, what is that new man? It's the image of Christ. Colossians chapter 3 and 4. Put off the old man. Put on the new man, which is made in the image of God. What's Paul saying?
And Romans 5 and 6 as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So this whole issue of being made in the image of God, Peter expresses in 2 Peter chapter 1, we become partakers of the divine nature through the knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. We become partakers of the divine knowledge through, we become partakers of the divine nature through the knowledge of Christ. Knowing Christ.
And that knowledge was increasing, right? Daniel tells us in the last day that knowledge would be increasing.
Absolutely. So my point is this, ladies and gentlemen, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, undoubtedly, and no commentator that I'm aware of, no translation that I'm aware of denies this either, right? They all render 2 Corinthians chapter 3, we are being transformed. Nobody denies it. Because you see, that's an innocuous, non-threatening translation. Oh, yeah, transformation from Old Covenant to New Covenant. Oh, wait a minute. The transformation from the Old Covenant was a transformation from death to life. That's what Paul says.
That's resurrection.
That's resurrection. And transformation from the image of Moses, which is the flesh, the world of the flesh, to the image of Christ, which is the image of the Spirit, or the world of the Spirit. So here is Paul in a universally admitted context of present active transformation from death to life, from the image of Moses to the image of Christ. And we've got Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 talking about the first man, Adam, was of the earth, earthy. And as we have borne the image of the earthy, the proper rendering, by far the most well-attested Greek commentaries or Greek manuscripts have the subjunctive, which means, as we have borne this image, let us bear this image. Well, what's this image that he's urging them to take? The image of Christ, which is 2 Corinthians chapter 3. That means that all of these present passive indicatives in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 must be given their full weight.
Yeah, absolutely. Letting Paul interpret Paul in Colossians, 2 Corinthians. I mean, come on.
Yeah. So what we need. And
just so, do you want me to read everywhere that it is?
Let's take them a little bit by little bit. I want to go back to this anecdote that I was telling this guy that contacted me and said I was all sorts of heretics. So when I started going back and forth with him, and I told him, I said, look, if we're going to have a conversation, you're going to have to lower the heat. You know, I'm more than willing to engage in conversation and study with you, but, you know, don't just come at me with both barrels blasting. Act with a little bit of decorum and what have you. So one of the things that I pointed out to him was, look at all the present passive indicatives. He had never heard it. Literally never heard it. So the very first thing out of his keyboard was, you're a heretic, you're false. There are no present passive indicatives. Well, he should have taken the time, you know, to pick up his Greek text and to see whether or not there are. Right. So when I started listing them, then he came back, and this is the most common objective. I've got friends who are far more knowledgeable in the Greek than I am, but we certainly disagree on this. I was told, well, Don, what you have to understand is Paul is just using the present passive in a gnomic sense. Now, the word gnomic is a kind of a fancy sounding word, but basically it means sort of kind of in a timeless sense. He's not using the present passive or even the present indicative in what can be called an iterative sense. He's using it in a timeless sense. In other words, as Sam Frost just tried to argue now, Paul is just simply saying raising the dead is just simply something that God does. Doesn't tell you when he does it, just simply tells you he's the one that raises the dead. Well, this fellow that contacted me, he actually argued in order for a present tense to be a valid iterative application, you've got to have a previous occurrence of it that lets you know that the present tense is a continuation of that. Now, look.
I think I see the train coming.
You know, number one, you're not going to find that in any Greek grammar. Daniel Wallace doesn't mention anything similar to that, if I read him correctly, unless I've missed something. I've never read a single Greek commentary that has ever said for a present tense or present passive tense to be taken in its iterative sense, you've got to have had a previous example of that, a previous present tense. Well, I came back and pointed out. And let me tell one other little anecdote here. I've got a friend, I haven't heard from him now in a year and a half, I guess, but he's working on his PhD. He was working on it through Vanderbilt. When I very first made the argument on the present passives with him, he said, no, Don, I wouldn't use that argument at all. He said, Paul's just using the gnomic sense. And by the way, folks, there are about 11 different usages of the present active. So it can sometimes be difficult. Sometimes, not always. It can sometimes be difficult. I mean, after all, you've got the historical present. That's a case in which a writer or a speaker is projecting themselves back into history, but using the present active indicative to speak of the things that were going on back then. He's not saying they were going on when he was writing. You've got a dramatic present tense. And I could go on, but there are about 11 different usages, if memory serves me correctly, of the present indicative.
But the context would show that.
The context shows you. You know, you can't just make a blanket statement and say, oh, well, yeah, I know Paul uses the present passive 10 times and the present indicative 1 time to speak about the resurrection, but that doesn't mean anything whatsoever about time. Well, first of all, that raises a very serious question. Paul knew his Greek really well. Why would he use a given Greek tense over and over and over and over again if he did not mean for us to sit up and go, boy, he sure is using that a lot. And here's the irony of what I see, Mike. I know you've encountered this. The people who make this argument, and I want to say, well, you know, it's the gnomic present, and we can go into this more next week. I can read some comments next week because we're running out of time already. But the folks who want to argue away the actual time element of the present passives don't make that argument on any of the other Greek tenses in 1 Corinthians 15. A classic example. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel, which I preached unto you, that's an aorist, which you received, an aorist, wherein also you stand, present, by which also you are being saved, present passive. Oh, well, now, hey, look, you know, that's really just a gnomic. Paul's not saying that they were being saved right then, surely. But they won't make that argument. Say, oh, no, obviously those people were in the process of being saved because after all, salvation, full salvation comes at the parousia, Hebrews 9:28. So, yeah, we have to take that present passive as iterative. of saying something about that present time. They had obeyed the gospel, the beginning of their salvation. They were being saved. They would be saved.
Yeah, that's the classic already and not yet. If anyone, that's the first thing someone just how they describe the already and not yet. You're saved. The scripture says you're saved. You're being saved, and you will be saved at the parousia.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 9 and following, where Peter is talking to the diaspora Jews who've accepted the gospel, and he says, "You are receiving." Now, that's a present participle there, if I remember correctly. And a lot of times we're told that participles don't carry time, but I think it's pretty obvious in that context that Peter is expressing the fact that they were in the process at that very time of receiving the end, the telos, the goal of their faith, i.e. the salvation of their soul. So yeah, here is a present active, it's a present participle, again, if memory serves me correctly, that I don't know of anyone that would deny the present reality of being saved. But they were also looking for what? Praise, honor, and glory at the parousia of Christ. They were looking for salvation at the coming of Jesus Christ. So it's like you said, this is just classic already, but not yet.
Well, we have the same thing in 1 Corinthians 15. I think there is a future too. We have the present passive and we have a future, just like in these other texts. And I mean, one of my favorite is Revelation 3:12. The NIV captures the present tense. It says that the New Jerusalem was coming down. Well, what was not in the New Jerusalem that was in the process of coming down? Oh, no more the death. The same death here in verse 26 of 1 Corinthians 15 that was being abolished.
There are countless examples of this present passive found throughout the New Testament that no one basically would argue with. Oh yeah, that's actually something that was going on at that time. But because of the preconceived ideas about the nature of the resurrection, they cannot conceive of Paul saying, and this is funny, I was reading some of Sam Frost's book on the essays on the resurrection. Good book, as you know. And he says, and he takes note in that book of the present passives. He quotes Gordon Fee. He quotes Thistleton. He quotes the Greek scholars who struggle with the present passives. And he says there's a good reason they're struggling with that, because they've got the concept, the erroneous concept, Frost properly said at the time, that Paul's talking about dead bodies coming out of the grave. Well, if Paul's talking about dead bodies coming out of the dirt, and Paul's saying this is already taking place, then that's pretty obviously ridiculous, right? Well, yeah, it is ridiculous, because the concept of resurrection is wrong.
Yeah. Is it also wrong for the immortal body at death only position? Does Ed Stevens have a problem with the present passive indicative?
Yes, he does. As a matter of fact, Ed Stevens strongly objected to the subjunctive mood in 1 Corinthians 15:49. He wrote against it. I don't know if he's changed his mind or not.
It destroys his whole paradigm. That's why.
Oh yeah, it threatens his entire paradigm. So what we're seeing, folks, just almost as an introduction. So next week we'll get into some more of the text in 1 Corinthians 15 and some other passages as well, in which the present passive, present active indicatives are used of soteriological realities that no one wants to deny was going on already. They just want to deny the present passives in 1 Corinthians 15. But I'll illustrate even further from the text of 1 Corinthians 15. There are other Greek tenses in the text that go, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we got to honor those Greek texts or tenses in the text. But in the meantime, we're out of time.
Amen.
All right.
That was a good show.
Good show. I love it. All right, folks, thank you for being with us. We'll see you again, Lord willing, next week.
That I may walk before my God light of life, in the 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 light